What if the most terrifying war in history happened during the quietest moment in Scripture? Imagine a moment so sacred, so misunderstood that even angels held their breath, not in worship, but in readiness. Not with harps and halos, but with swords and secrets. You've heard the story of the crucifixion, Jesus on the cross, darkness at noon, the temple veil torn. But have you ever asked yourself what was happening behind the veil? What moved in the spiritual realm while the world was mocking a dying man? In this video, we're not retelling the crucifixion. We're pulling back the curtain. We're going to explore what happened behind the scenes, what two of heaven's most powerful angels, Michael and Uriel, were doing during the darkest hours of human history, and why what they did still affects you today. So stay with me, because the war over your soul didn't end at Calvary. In fact, it started there. Have you ever been in a situation where someone looked weak, but held all the power? At Golgotha, Jesus looked defeated. His body was battered, bleeding. The crowd was loud. The soldiers were confident. But in the silence above the scene, something far more dangerous was unfolding. Archangel Michael, the warrior of heaven, wasn't just watching. He was standing guard, but not like a soldier protecting a general. He was guarding a spiritual contract, a divine transaction that would break hell's legal claim over humanity. And Uriel, he wasn't just present. He was preserving a light, God's hidden wisdom, the kind that turns chaos into clarity. Let me explain this in a modern way. Imagine you're in a courtroom. The accused is silent. He's not defending himself. Everyone thinks he's about to be condemned. But behind the scenes, legal documents are being signed, witnesses are standing by, and a verdict is about to be handed down that no one expected. That's what was happening at the cross. When Jesus cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" It wasn't a cry of defeat. It was a coded signal. In that very moment, angelic authority was activated. Michael gripped his flaming sword not to strike, but to prevent interference. Uriel, the guardian of God's mysteries, prepared to release light into the darkest place, imaginable, death itself. The world saw a man die. The angels saw a king rise. Let's rethink the cross not as a torture device, but as a throne, a battlefield, a courtroom, a pulpit, all in one. Jesus wasn't executed. He officiated something, and the angels were not grieving. They were stationed. Michael, the archangel of war, was not sent to fight demons with brute force. He was sent to enforce a spiritual law. Remember how the Bible says Jesus could have called 12 legions of angels, but he didn't, because sometimes the most terrifying power is the power that doesn't move, yet can. Think about this. Have you ever had a parent or mentor who didn't yell, didn't raise a hand, but with a single look, they communicated something so powerful, it stopped you in your tracks? That's the kind of spiritual presence Jesus carried at the cross, a restrained authority that made hell tremble. Michael understood what many believers still don't. Spiritual warfare isn't always loud. It's legal. And Jesus wasn't losing, he was transferring ownership. He was taking the sins of the world upon himself, offering not just a sacrifice, but signing a covenant in blood. Uriel, on the other hand, was handling the revelation. You've heard of courtroom clerks recording every word. That was Uriel's realm. He was the keeper of prophetic timelines, the one who ensures the truth reaches the right people at the right time. Paul on the road to Damascus, the thief on the cross, you watching this video. Together, these two angels weren't spectators. They were executors. Heaven's will was unfolding, and they were there to enforce it. Let me share a story. A woman in her 60s I once met in church shared how she was falsely accused at her workplace. She lost her job. Her name was dragged through meetings and emails. People she trained turned against her. She told me she wanted to shout, to protest. But something inside her, something deeply spiritual, told her to endure in silence. Weeks later, the truth came out. Her former manager was caught in fraud. She was offered her job back with back pay and an apology from the board. But she declined. God was doing something bigger, she said. I wasn't just losing a job. I was being transferred into purpose. That's what the cross teaches us. Jesus didn't explain himself. He didn't justify or retaliate. He endured. And behind the veil of agony, angels were moving. That's why your silence isn't always weakness. Sometimes your quietest season is when heaven is loudest on your behalf. After his final breath, Jesus' body hung limp in the eyes of man, but in the unseen realm, something unthinkable had just begun. He wasn't resting. He was descending. Not metaphorically, not symbolically, but spiritually into the realm of the dead. Ancient Hebrews called it Sheol. It wasn't a cartoon hell with pitchforks. It was a holding place split in two parts, one of torment for the wicked, the other of peace for the righteous like Abraham, David, and the prophets. But no soul, no matter how faithful, could leave. The gates were sealed, not by metal, but by spiritual legality. That's where Jesus was headed, not as a victim of death, but as its conqueror. And he didn't go alone. Michael followed, not to fight, but to oversee, to enforce. He wasn't there to slash demons, but to ensure that no spirit dared interfere. Uriel came too, his fire illuminating the very darkness death had claimed for generations. He was the torchbearer of God's hidden truth, ensuring every moment in Sheol unfolded according to prophecy. Let me paint it clearer. Imagine the lights going out in the basement of existence. Then suddenly a glow appears, not from a flashlight, but from a king stepping in barefoot, still bearing fresh wounds, but walking like a ruler into his own territory. That's what shook Sheol. The fallen angels locked away since the flood stirred. The rebellious spirits from Genesis 6 grew silent. Something foreign had entered their domain, righteousness wrapped in blood. They weren't used to holiness stepping onto their turf. And Jesus didn't ask permission. He didn't knock. He walked in with the full authority of heaven and said, "Open." Because when the Son of God descends, even death must make way. Let's be honest, many Christians treat Jesus' victory over death like a movie ending, quick, dramatic, and mostly symbolic. But biblically, it was far more structured. It wasn't just spiritual, it was legal. On the cross, Jesus wasn't just suffering, he was finalizing a transaction. A debt was being paid, a legal exchange was happening. Your sin, my failure, all of it was being transferred onto him. Not emotionally, but covenantally. And when he descended into Sheol, he wasn't asking for keys, he took them. Why? Because he owned them by right. This is where Michael's role shines. In Revelation 12, we see Michael cast down Satan. In Daniel 10, he fights over kingdoms. But here, he wasn't swinging his sword. He was standing guard like a divine bailiff. His presence said this transfer is lawful. No opposition will be entertained. And Uriel. He opened what few angels were ever allowed to touch, the scroll of divine mystery. What prophets longed to see, what scribes had hinted at. Uriel unveiled it not with thunder, but with clarity. Let me put this in a story. Imagine a judge stepping into a prison and declaring the inmates free, not by pity, but by law. Then imagine the chief enforcer standing at the gate, arms crossed, daring anyone to object. That's what Jesus and Michael did. That's what happened in Sheol. Every demon shrank back. Every chain snapped not from noise, but from authority. And every righteous soul, Abraham, Moses, Hannah, Esther, looked up and saw the light they'd been promised. Because what Jesus brought wasn't just comfort. It was deliverance, legally binding, eternally valid. The silence of Sheol was shattered, not by war, but by truth. We picture the resurrection starting when the stone rolled away, birds chirping, morning light breaking through. But that's only the earthly part. In reality, resurrection began in the deepest part of death, when Jesus stood in Sheol, and death itself recognized its limits. When Jesus arrived, he didn't preach a sermon. He didn't raise his voice. He simply walked with wounds still open, and every gate that held the righteous began to groan. Not because metal moved, but because legal chains started breaking. And that's where the real miracle happened. Uriel held in his hand the scroll of mysteries. As Jesus walked deeper into the shadow realm, Uriel unfurled it. Truths that had been sealed since the garden were now revealed. Every prophecy, every shadow, every feast, it all made sense in that moment. The entire underworld began to light up, not from fire, but from revelation. Meanwhile, Michael didn't move. He didn't need to. His presence alone ensured nothing unclean could contest what was happening. Jesus wasn't escaping from death. He was reclaiming territory that was never death's to begin with. Have you ever walked into a room you were once locked out of, but now hold the key? That's how Jesus moved. Not as a guest, but as the new owner. And then it happened. He reached the lowest chamber of death, and there, without thunder, without earthquake, he stretched out his hand, and keys appeared. Keys not forged by man, but etched by eternity. The key of death, the key of Hades, the key of authority. And he took them, silently, legally, forever. We've spent the last 20 minutes looking at things most churches won't even talk about. Not because they're unbiblical, but because they're too vast, too layered, too holy to casually summarize. The spiritual war behind the cross. the descent into Sheol, the legal transfer of authority, the silence that screamed louder than thunder, and two angels, Michael and Uriel, standing guard while the universe changed. But if you think this story is only about angels and ancient events, you've missed the point. This story is about you. It's about what heaven does when you're too weak to fight. It's about what's happening in the spirit realm when nothing seems to be happening at all. It's about what it means to trust even when all you see is darkness. Let me ask you something honest. Have you ever had a moment where you felt like everything inside you was dying? Maybe it was the end of a relationship you prayed for. Maybe it was the betrayal of someone you trusted with your soul. Maybe it was a season where God felt distant and prayer felt like speaking into a void. And you thought, maybe I messed up too bad. Maybe this is where it ends. But if Jesus teaches us anything at the cross, it's this. Silence is not absence. In his moment of greatest agony, Jesus didn't rebuke his enemies. He didn't explain his purpose to the crowd. He didn't call for help. He endured. And while men mocked and demons gloated, and Rome thought it had won, angels were obeying commands the world couldn't hear. Michael was standing guard over something hell couldn't interrupt. Uriel was illuminating truths not even prophets had fully seen. And Jesus, he was winning by surrendering. That's the divine paradox. Victory doesn't always look like standing on a mountain. Sometimes it looks like hanging on a cross with nothing left but obedience and blood. So what does this mean for you? It means that when your life feels like it's falling apart, heaven might be setting things in order behind the scenes. It means that even in your weakest moment, when your reputation is ruined, your finances are broken, or your mind is exhausted, you are not spiritually unprotected. Michael didn't just stand guard over Jesus. He guards those who belong to him. Uriel doesn't just reveal mysteries to apostles. He brings light to ordinary people who are willing to see beyond the surface. You may feel forgotten, but heaven has not forgotten you. You may feel like your season is over, but resurrection doesn't begin at the surface. It begins in the depths. And yes, your suffering might not make sense right now, but God does some of his greatest work in the silence between your cries. There's a reason Psalm 91 says, "He will command his angels concerning you," not just to protect you from visible danger, but to stand in the spirit where you cannot stand for yourself. That's what happened on the cross. And if Jesus walked through pain, silence, betrayal, and death, and still rose with keys in his hands, then you can walk through your darkness and rise too. Because the same angels who watched him rise are watching you. You were never alone, so now you've seen it. The crucifixion wasn't just an execution, it was a cosmic transaction, a courtroom, a battleground, a coronation. Michael stood ready not to strike but to shield the transfer of all human failure onto the only one who could carry it. Uriel burned not with wrath, but with revelation, releasing waves of light that would ripple through nations and centuries right into this very moment where you are hearing the truth. And while men wept and demons shrieked and Rome mocked, heaven stood to attention. Because when Jesus said, "It is finished," Michael raised his sword. Uriel sealed the scroll, and eternity shifted. So next time you feel like you're losing, remember Jesus won in silence, in pain, in darkness, and angels were watching. You were never alone.